You know, when a businessman, if I want to start a business, and I have some, harebrained scheme that doesn't work, I mean, how long can I run my business? Not long. I mean, I'm going to lose money. Eventually, I got to stop losing money. I don't have an unlimited amount. So the market has a way of stopping bad business activity. And a good businessman who finds a way to produce products at a profit, which means he's allocating resources effectively and providing consumers with a valuable good or service, he's rewarded with profits. So that industry, that business can continue because it's profitable. But businesses that are losing money, they have to stop. But when the government steps into the picture, they can lose money indefinitely. It doesn't matter. In fact, the more they lose, the bigger they usually get. I mean, look at, the post office has been losing money since inception. They just, announced now that, I think they have a huge budget deficit. They want to eliminate, I think, Saturday mail delivery. They want to increase, the price of the stamp again. Look at Amtrak. I mean, all the government programs. The less efficient they are, the more tax revenue they're able to consume. So there is no checks and balances. And of course, there's no profit. I mean, how do you even know if what you're doing is right? I mean, the way a businessman knows, if he's making a profit, he's doing the right thing. But the government, they don't have that measurement tool to guide their decisions. But this is the direction in which the economy is moving. And this whole concept of too big to fail. Why is it that so many of these companies are now too big to fail? Well, it's because the government created the moral hazard that allowed them to get so big. Because you've got these companies that people perceive can't fail. So what happens? They loan them money because they know that, well, if the company fails, the government's going to bail me out, or the government's not going to let them fail. So what happens is these inefficient companies get bigger and bigger, specifically because the government is there subsidizing their borrowing. Meanwhile, other companies that are probably much more creditworthy can't get capital or have a higher cost of capital because they're being crowded out by all these other companies that got this implied government guarantee because they're so big. So the government is in there distorting the free market and preventing a more efficient allocation of resources. There are a lot of companies that need to go bankrupt. I mean, there's nothing wrong with a company going bankrupt, right? That's the market's way of purging bad businesses from the economy, right? When the government comes in and says, no, we can't let AIG go bankrupt. We can't let General Motors go bankrupt because look at all the people that would be unemployed. Well, the consequence of this, we're going to have more people unemployed by keeping them in business than by letting them fail because they're not productive. They're wasting resources. And the government doesn't have any money to keep General Motors in business. The government has to take the money from someplace else. It's got to move it from a place to where the free market would allocate it and shift it to a company that the free market wanted to bankrupt. And it doesn't mean that if a company like General Motors goes bankrupt, that no one's going to make cars, that all those auto workers are going to be unemployed. Far from it. There are assets at General Motors. There are plants there. Someone's going to buy those plants. They're not going to burn them to the ground. Someone's going to buy them. And someone's going to try to hire those auto workers. They're probably going to pay them a lot less money than union scale, but the companies couldn't operate profitably paying union wages. They have to pay lower wages. And, without all the health care benefits, without all the debt, probably somebody who knows something about the automobile industry can get in there and buy up these assets and actually make money running. And maybe 4 or 5 years from now, we'd employ more people in the automobile industry because we had a profitable industry, subsidizing money-losing industries. That's what they did in the Soviet Union. That's what they did in China before they discovered capitalism. And unfortunately, we're going in the opposite direction. We're doing exactly what Hoover and Roosevelt did to create the Great Depression. And it's amazing, how little our politicians or any historians seem to have learned from that experience. But the conventional wisdom is that, we had this free market economy, and it collapsed in 1929, and Herbert Hoover was stubbornly a staunch free market advocate. He refused to do anything, and he let the market work, and that's what created the Depression, because he didn't do enough. And then Roosevelt came in with a New Deal and got us out of the Depression. And none of that can be further from the truth. I mean, we got out of the Depression not because of the New Deal. We got out of the Depression despite the New Deal. If it wasn't for the New Deal, we would have got out of it a lot sooner. In fact, if it wasn't for Hoover doing exactly what Roosevelt did, doing exactly what George Bush did, it never would have been a Great Depression. See, what happened is in the 1920s, there was a bubble in the stock market. Why was there a bubble? Same reason there's always a bubble. The Fed was too loose. The Fed kept interest rates too low. And the inflation that the Fed created went into the stock market. In fact, in my book Crash Proof, I quoted from Alan Greenspan, one of his essays from the 60s, in which he laid out the causes of that boom and bust and blamed it on the Fed. So the Fed kept interest rates too low. We had a stock market bubble. It burst. When it burst, a lot of malinvestments needed to be liquidated. And, President Hoover was given advice to allow the liquidation to run its course, to stay out, to let the market function. And he refused. He refused to do that. He wanted to stimulate the economy. He wanted to bail people out. He wanted to ease everybody's pain. He thought that government could do something to help the situation. And so he did all sorts of things, interfered with the market, interfered with price setting and wages, and interfered with production, and did all sorts of things, and prevented the economy from efficiently working its way out of those malinvestments and resuming solid growth. Instead, he created the Depression. And then when Roosevelt came in, he made the Depression great, because he had one program after another that interfered with the market. But underneath the surface, we had a structurally sound economy that eventually was able to grow despite all the things that the government was doing, and despite the fact that we had to fight a Second World War. A lot of people think, well, the war got us out of the Depression. No, it didn't. It would have been a lot easier to get out of the Depression if we didn't have to fight the war. The war used up resources that would have been better employed and productively. But there's no understanding of that now. Now, the common wisdom is the government is required. We can't get out of the Depression without the government. And the government has to come in there and spend. And that's the exact wrong thing to do. If we are in trouble right now because we spent too much money, how could it possibly be that spending more is the solution? If we're in trouble because we borrowed too much money, how is borrowing trillions more going to solve the problem? How is it possible that you can put out a fire with gasoline? It makes absolutely no sense. But they don't understand. They want the government in there stimulating jobs. I was looking at the jobs report that came out just last Friday. And one of these famous economists, Mark Zandi, gets a lot of press, was very happy to see that about, 70,000 people got jobs in the Census Department. And he was bragging that over the next year, the government's going to have to hire 1 million people to do the census. And this was going to be a big boost to the economy. I'm thinking, and this guy is, how is it possible that because we assign 1 million people the job of counting everybody up, that this is going to create any wealth? Do these census workers produce anything? They're going to get a paycheck, they're going to want to spend it. Where's all the stuff going to come from that these census workers are going to want to buy? Is there any real productivity? If you can actually create productivity and wealth by hiring census workers, then why not hire 2 million? Why not double count? Just make sure. I said, why not just give all the census workers abacuses and let them keep track that way? Then we might need 10 million of them. Problem solved. What the politicians don't understand is we don't want jobs so that we can work. Right? Everybody in the Soviet Union had a job. All the slaves had jobs. That wasn't the problem. Lack of work wasn't the problem. They didn't have any purchasing power associated with their labor. So we don't want jobs because we want to work. We want jobs because we want to buy things. We want purchasing power. And you can't get that by government creating jobs. The jobs have to come from the private sector. The jobs in the government sector have to be paid for by everybody else. We need to produce enough to support the government. When they talk about this whole concept of a government stimulus, the only real stimulus would be to shrink the size of government. Because that's the burden. If you're trying to run a race and you want some stimulus, you don't add weights on your backpack.